It started with a simple look of disdain. When Brad Sterling, a high-powered VP, saw a quiet man in a plain polo shirt sitting in seat 1A, he didn't see a fellow passenger. He saw a non-revenue employee stealing his space. Brad thought he could use his platinum status and FAA safety loopholes to bully the man back to economy. He thought he was teaching a lesson in hierarchy, but he forgot the most important rule of business. Never judge a book by its cover, and never assume you're the most powerful person in the room. Because the man in seat 1A wasn't just a passenger. He was the one flying into town to decide Brad's future. Watch the moment arrogance met absolute authority. The rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the JFK Wingtip Lounge, a gray curtain matching the mood of the weary travelers inside. It was the kind of Tuesday afternoon that felt heavy, the air pressure dropping ahead of the storm, pressing against the temples of everyone hoping to beat the weather to Zurich. In the corner of the lounge, sheltered by a high-backed leather wingchair, Dr. Marcus Thorne sat with the stillness of a statue. At 52, Marcus had mastered the art of being present without being seen. He wore a black polo shirt, the cotton weave fine and devoid of any logos, and a pair of trousers that had seen better days but were pressed with military precision. Perched on his nose were tortoiseshell glasses that framed eyes accustomed to reading blueprints and balance sheets. Currently, they were scanning the pages of a hardcover book on Stoic philosophy, though his attention was split. He wasn't eavesdropping by choice. It was simply impossible not to hear the man pacing 3 feet away. Brad Sterling was a man who took up space. He was 45, though the stress lines around his eyes and the slightly suffocated look of his neck in a dress shirt 2 sizes too small suggested a body aging faster than its years. He wore a navy suit that shouted its price tag, a gold Rolex Submariner that caught the lounge lights every time he gesticulated, and he was currently shouting into an iPhone 15 Pro Max as if the connection depended on his volume. "You do not understand, Gary," Brad barked, ignoring the irritated glances from a nearby couple. "I am telling you the acquisition is a lock. I am flying out there to sign the papers. Project Horizon is my baby. If Thorne Capital wants to play hardball, let them. We have the leverage. Our Q3 numbers are untouchable." Marcus turned a page of his book, his expression unchanging. He knew Project Horizon. He knew the Q3 numbers. And he knew with mathematical certainty that Brad was lying. The Q3 numbers were inflated by a one-time asset sale, and the leverage Brad claimed to have was as thin as the air at 30,000 feet. Brad spun around, pacing back toward Marcus. He stopped directly in front of Marcus's chair, blocking the light. He wasn't looking at Marcus. He was looking through him, using the space Marcus occupied as a pivot point for his turn. "I will crush them, Gary," Brad said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl that was somehow louder than his shout. "I will walk into that boardroom, slam the term sheet on the table, and remind them that without our software, their logistics chain collapses. I am the alpha in this room." Marcus slowly lowered his book. He looked at Brad's shoes. Brown leather loafers, Gucci horsebit, scuffed at the toe. He looked up at the belt, straining slightly. Then he looked at Brad's face. It was slick with a sheen of sweat, the eyes darting, the pupils dilated. This wasn't an alpha. This was a man terrified of drowning, thrashing in the water and calling it swimming. Brad finally seemed to notice the human being in front of him. He pulled the phone away from his ear for a second, covering the microphone. "Do you mind?" Brad snapped at Marcus. "I am on a private call." Marcus looked at the empty lounge chairs surrounding them. There were at least 10 other places Brad could have paced. "The lounge is public," Marcus said. His voice was a deep baritone, quiet but resonant. "The acoustics, however, are excellent." Brad blinked. He hadn't expected the furniture to speak. He scoffed, a short, sharp sound of dismissal, and turned his back on Marcus, walking away toward the bar. "Yeah, I am still here," Brad said into the phone. "Just some guy. Look, upgrade my hotel suite. I want the view of the lake. I need to get in the right headspace to destroy these people." Marcus closed his book. He placed it gently in his leather messenger bag. He didn't feel anger. Anger was inefficient. He felt a profound sense of fatigue. He had spent 30 years building systems, designing fuselages, and analyzing risk. He had learned that the most dangerous component in any system wasn't the metal that fatigue cracked or the software that bugged. It was the human element. specifically the human ego. And he was about to spend 8 hours in a metal tube with a prime specimen of it. 30 minutes later, the boarding announcement for Flight 902 to Zurich crackled over the PA system. The storm outside had intensified, turning the tarmac into a blur of gray and flashing amber lights. At the gate, the hierarchy of air travel was being strictly enforced. Zone 1 passengers were already lining up, a collection of tired executives, wealthy retirees, and the occasional honeymoon couple. Elias, a 28-year-old software founder in a hoodie and expensive sneakers, stood near the front of the line. He was watching the dynamic unfold. He had recognized Brad Sterling from a TechCrunch article years ago. Sterling was VP of sales at Omnicorp. Elias had once admired the guy's hustle. Now, watching Brad verbally berate the gate agent because the facial recognition scanner was slow, Elias felt a pit in his stomach. "This is ridiculous," Brad was saying, tapping his platinum card on the counter. "I fly 200,000 miles a year. Do I need to call the concierge desk to get this line moving?" "Sir, the system is rebooting," the gate agent said, her smile tight and practiced. "It will be just a moment." Marcus approached the line quietly. He stood a few feet behind Brad. He didn't check his phone. He didn't tap his foot. He just stood, hands clasped loosely in front of him. Brad turned around, scanning the crowd for an audience to his outrage. His eyes landed on Marcus. He did a double take, his gaze raking over Marcus's plain polo shirt and the well-worn leather bag. "Zone 4 is boarding later, buddy," Brad said, pointing toward the general boarding area. "This is priority. First class and diamond medallion only." Marcus looked at the finger pointing at him, then up at Brad's face. "I am aware of the boarding procedure," Marcus said. "Yeah, well, they are strict today," Brad said, turning back to the gate agent. He chuckled to himself, loud enough for Elias to hear. Everyone tries to sneak up during the chaos. No respect for the process. Elias frowned. He wanted to say something, but the scanner beeped green. Brad marched through, head held high, looking like a general leading a charge into battle. Marcus stepped up to the scanner. The machine whirred. "Welcome back, Dr. Thorne," the gate agent said, her face relaxing into a genuine smile for the first time in 20 minutes. "We have you in 1A today. Thank you for your loyalty." "Thank you, Jessica," Marcus said, reading her name tag. "I hope the shift gets easier." He walked down the jet bridge, the sound of the rain drumming on the aluminum roof. He prepared himself. He knew the psychology of the cabin. First class was a microcosm of society's worst impulses, compressed into a 6-foot-wide cylinder. When Marcus stepped onto the plane, the humidity hit him first. The cabin was warm, the air conditioning unit struggling against the ambient heat of the delay. The soft jazz music playing over the speakers felt incongruous with the tension radiating from the front of the cabin. Brad Sterling was already standing at row 1, struggling to shove an oversized Toomey carry-on into the overhead bin. He was huffing, sweat beading on his forehead. Marcus moved to slip past him to get to seat 1A, the window seat on the left side. Brad stopped shoving his bag and looked down at Marcus. His expression shifted from frustration to confusion, and then to a smug realization. "Oh, excuse me," Brad said, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. "You must be the deadhead." Marcus paused. A deadhead was an airline employee, usually a pilot or flight attendant, flying in a passenger seat to get to another airport for a shift. "Excuse me?" Marcus asked. "The non-rev," Brad said, gesturing vaguely at Marcus's attire. "Employee travel. Look, buddy, usually they put you guys in row 4 or back in economy comfort if the flight is full. Seat 1A is usually reserved for revenue passengers. Paying customers." Brad emphasized the word paying with a wet, heavy pronunciation. Marcus looked at the empty seat, then back at Brad. The assumption was breathtaking in its laziness. It wasn't just that Brad assumed Marcus couldn't afford the ticket. It was that Brad needed Marcus to be an employee. It was the only way Brad's worldview made sense. "My ticket is for 1A," Marcus said simply. Brad laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Must be a lottery winner then. Or maybe the computer glitched. Look, just do me a favor. Once we are in the air, stay out of the galley kitchen. I have a lot of work to do and I don't want to hear the crew chatting all night." Marcus didn't respond. He stepped into his row. He placed his leather bag under the seat in front of him. He sat down, buckling his seatbelt with a definitive click. Brad stared at him for a second longer, waiting for a reaction, an apology, a submission. When he got none, he grunted and turned back to his bag. He slammed the bin door shut. It didn't catch. He slammed it again, harder. Sarah, the lead flight attendant, hurried over. She was 32, with perfect hair and eyes that looked like she hadn't slept in 2 days. She had been flying this route for 5 years, and she could spot a problem passenger from the way they held their boarding pass. Brad Sterling was flashing red indicators on her internal radar. "Sir, let me help you with that," Sarah said, reaching for the bin latch. "I got it," Brad snapped. "This latch is broken. Typical maintenance. I will be writing a report about this." He gave the bin one final violent shove. It clicked shut. In the process, the corner of his heavy bag crushed the shoulder of a charcoal wool blazer that Marcus had neatly folded and placed in the corner of the bin earlier. Marcus saw it. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. Brad blocked the aisle. "Problem? You are crushing my jacket," Marcus said. Brad looked up at the bin. "Oh, that old thing? It's fine. It's wool. It bounces back. I need my bag accessible. My hard drive is in there." "Please move your bag," Marcus said. It wasn't a request. Brad rolled his eyes. He opened the bin, shoved his bag 2 inches to the left, and slammed it shut again. "Better? Or do you want me to iron it for you too?" Marcus sat back down. He adjusted his glasses. He picked up the pre-flight menu, though he already knew he would only order water. Sarah moved in with a tray of crystal flutes. "Champagne, Mr. Sterling?" "Keep it coming, honey," Brad said, grabbing a glass. "And bring me 2 Biscoffs. I skipped lunch." Sarah turned to Marcus. "And for you, sir? Sparkling water, please. No ice." Brad took a loud sip of his champagne. He leaned over the center console that separated their seats. The divider was down. "So," Brad said, his voice taking on a fake, inquisitive tone that was worse than his shouting. "Zurich. Fun city. If you can afford it. What brings you there? Music festival?" Marcus kept his eyes on the menu. "No. Sports clinic?" Brad pressed. "You look fit. Ex-athlete? Who did you play for?" This was the second box Brad was trying to put him in. If not an employee, then an entertainer. Someone who made money with their body, not their mind. Marcus slowly folded the menu. He turned his head and looked Brad directly in the eyes. The silence stretched for 3 seconds. "I am an engineer," Marcus said. Brad blinked. "Engineer? Like trains? Like aerospace," Marcus said. "Oh," Brad chuckled, relaxing. He had found a box he understood. "Technician. Blue collar, technically. Probably a contractor. Nice. Good money and overtime, I hear. I work in software. VP level. We basically run the back end of the global supply chain. You probably use our systems when you are turning wrenches." Marcus didn't correct him. He didn't explain that he held a PhD in fluid dynamics from MIT. He didn't explain that he hadn't turned a wrench in 20 years because he was too busy designing the propulsion systems that made modern flight efficient. "I am sure your work is vital," Marcus said. "It is," Brad said, puffed up by the validation he thought he received. "Vital is the word. That is why I need this space. I have a merger to close. It is worth more than most people earn in 10 lifetimes." He took another swig of champagne. "By the way," Brad said, his eyes dropping to Marcus's wrist as Marcus reached for his water. "Is that a Patek?" "It is," Marcus said. Brad squinted at it. "A Calatrava. Vintage. The leather looks a bit worn, though. You should get that serviced. Or is it a replica? No shame in it. They make good fakes in Canal Street these days." "It was my father's," Marcus said. He bought it the day he became the first black tenure-track professor at his university in 1974. Brad paused. The narrative was slipping away from him again. "Right," Brad said, retreating into dismissal. "Nice heirloom. I wear the Submariner. Gold. Heavy. I like to feel the weight of it, you know? Lets people know you have arrived. Some people need the weight to know they exist," Marcus said. Brad frowned. He wasn't sure if he had been insulted. He decided to ignore it. He pulled out his laptop, a sleek company-issued machine, and slapped it onto the tray table. Captain Miller's voice came over the intercom, sounding apologetic. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. We are looking at a bit of a delay here. Ground control has put a hold on all departures due to the storm cells moving in. We are expecting a wait of about 45 minutes to an hour before we can push back. We ask for your patience. We have turned off the main engines to conserve fuel, so the cabin temperature might rise slightly until we get the APU fully cycling. A groan rippled through the cabin, but in seat 1B it was an explosion. Unbelievable! Brad shouted, slamming his hand on the armrest. I have a connecting helicopter in Zurich. I cannot be late. He hit the call button. Once, twice, 3 times. Sarah appeared instantly, her smile straining at the edges. Yes, Mr. Sterling? Get the pilot on the line, Brad demanded. Tell him I need to leave now. Can't we route around the storm? I have flown in worse than this. Sir, Sarah said, keeping her voice low. It is air traffic control. The captain has no say in this. It is for everyone's safety. Safety, Brad scoffed. It is incompetence. He loosened his tie. The heat was rising. Sweat began to bead on his upper lip. He looked around for something to blame, something to control. His eyes landed on Marcus. Marcus was reading his book again. The window shade next to him was open, letting in the gray, dreary light of the storm. Hey, Brad said. Close that shade. Marcus looked up. I am reading. It is too bright, Brad said. It is glaring on my screen. I cannot work. And if I cannot work, this company loses money. Close it. The cabin lights are dim, Marcus said. I need the natural light. I don't care what you need. Brad snapped, his voice rising, drawing the attention of Mrs. Gable in row 2 and Elias across the aisle. I paid $5,000 for this seat so I could work. You are probably flying on points or a buddy pass. Show some professional courtesy. Marcus marked his page with a thin silk ribbon. He turned his body fully toward Brad. Courtesy, Marcus said. His voice calm but hard as granite, is mutual. You have insulted my profession, crushed my property, and questioned my presence here since the moment you boarded. I will not close the shade. Brad's face turned a mottled shade of red. He wasn't used to resistance. In his office, when he yelled, people jumped. When he demanded, people capitulated. He was the VP of sales. He brought in the revenue. He was the rainmaker. Who was this calm, quiet man to deny him? Brad pressed the call button again. He held it down. Sarah rushed back. Is everything okay? No, it is not okay, Brad said, pointing a shaking finger at Marcus. This passenger is being aggressive. Sarah looked at Marcus. Marcus was sitting with his hands folded in his lap, the picture of tranquility. Aggressive, sir? Sarah asked, confused. Passive-aggressive, Brad corrected, using a corporate buzzword he wielded like a weapon. He is creating a hostile environment. He is refusing to cooperate with a reasonable request to facilitate a working environment. I feel threatened. The word threatened hung in the air. In the post-9/11 world, in the world of viral airline videos, that word was a nuclear launch key. It shifted a disagreement into a security protocol. Sarah paled. She looked at Marcus, her eyes pleading. She knew Brad was the aggressor. But her iPad told her Brad was a Diamond Key customer. It told her he spent $500,000 a year with the airline. And she knew that one complaint from him could put a letter in her file that would freeze her promotion for a year. Sir, Sarah whispered to Marcus, leaning in. I am so sorry. But to keep the peace, could you maybe lower the shade just halfway? Or, we have an open seat in 3D. It is an aisle seat, but it is away from the glare. It was a betrayal. A small one born of fear, but a betrayal nonetheless. She was asking the victim to move to accommodate the bully. Marcus looked at Sarah. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes. He saw the fear of the system. He didn't blame her, but he couldn't obey her. I understand your position, Sarah, Marcus said. But if I move or if I close this shade, I am validating his behavior. I am accepting the premise that his comfort is worth more than my dignity. He's talking back to the crew. Brad shouted, seizing the moment. You hear that? He is refusing a crew instruction. That is a federal offense. FAA Regulation 121.580. Interference with a crew member. Brad knew the code. He had probably used it before. He was weaponizing the safety manual. Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman in 2A, spoke up. Her voice was sharp like cracking ice. He is doing nothing of the sort, you horrid man. He is reading a book. You are the one shouting like a toddler who dropped his ice cream. Brad whipped around to face her. Stay out of this, lady. Unless you want to be witness to a security incident. This is between me, the crew, and this obstacle. He turned back to Marcus, a sneer curling his lip. You picked the wrong day to play Rosa Parks, pal, Brad hissed. I know the CEO of this airline. I play golf with his VP of operations. You are going to be escorted off this plane, and I am going to wave goodbye from the window. Marcus looked at Brad. He saw the fear behind the bluster. Brad was terrified of the meeting in Zurich. He was terrified of losing his status. And he was projecting all that terror onto the most convenient target he could find. A black man who refused to be small. You mentioned the VP of operations, Marcus said quietly. Yeah, Brad said, pulling out his phone. I am texting him right now. And you mentioned Project Horizon, Marcus continued. The software merger. Brad froze. His thumb hovered over his screen. How do you know that name? You talk very loudly, Marcus said. Brad narrowed his eyes. So what? You eavesdropping now? You trying to steal trade secrets? No, Marcus said. I am assessing risk. And right now, the volatility index in seat 1B is critically high. Brad laughed, but it sounded nervous. You think you are smart. You think you can use big words and intimidate me? I am the one with the power here. I am the one with the status. You're just a passenger. A placeholder. Brad turned to Sarah. Go tell the captain. I want this man removed. I don't feel safe flying with him. He is unstable. Look at him. Staring at me. It's weird. It's threatening. Sarah looked at Brad, then at Marcus. She was shaking. Sir, she said to Brad. The captain is busy with ATC. I don't care. Brad screamed. This is a security issue. Get the captain back here. Or I am calling the FAA directly and reporting this entire crew for negligence. The cabin went dead silent. Even the jazz music seemed to stop. Elias across the aisle was holding his phone up, the camera lens peeking over the seat back. Marcus sighed. It was a deep, weary sound. He reached into his pocket. Brad flinched, jumping back as if Marcus had pulled a weapon. See? Brad yelled. He's reaching for something. Marcus pulled out a fountain pen. He opened his book. He wrote a single note in the margin. Then he looked at Sarah. You should probably call the captain, Sarah, Marcus said softly. Not for me. For him. Why? Brad sneered. You giving up? You want to confess? No, Marcus said. Because when the captain comes out here, he is going to need to make a decision. And I want to make sure he has all the facts before he decides whose trip ends today. Facts? Brad laughed. The facts are I am a Diamond member, and you are nobody. Marcus turned back to the window. The rain was easing up. The gray was breaking. We shall see, Marcus whispered. Brad stood there, panting, adrenaline flooding his system. He felt like he had won. He had forced the issue. He had asserted dominance. He sat back down, a triumphant smirk on his face, and opened his laptop again. He typed a message to his boss. Flight delayed. Dealing with some drama in first class. Putting a difficult passenger in his place. Taking control. Will update from the air. He hit send. He had no idea that the message he just sent was the first nail in his own coffin. He had no idea that the nobody next to him was the only reason his company still existed. And he had no idea that the captain, who was currently walking out of the cockpit door, adjusting his cap, wasn't coming to kick Marcus off. But the look on the captain's face as he parted the curtain, a look of sheer, terrified recognition, was about to change everything. Captain Miller stepped through the heavy velvet curtain separating the galley from the first-class cabin. He was a man of 55, with salt and pepper hair cut to regulation length and the kind of weathered face that suggested he had landed planes in crosswinds that would ground lesser pilots. He adjusted his cap, his eyes scanning the cabin with the practiced efficiency of someone looking for a loose rivet. Behind him, 2 Port Authority officers waited on the jet bridge, visible only as dark silhouettes against the gray light of the open door. Brad Sterling stood up straighter. This was it. The cavalry had arrived. He adjusted his tie, wiping the sweat from his upper lip. He felt a surge of vindication. The system worked. If you pushed hard enough, if you made enough noise, the gears of authority would turn in your favor. He had learned this in boardrooms, in hotel lobbies, and at rental car counters across America. The loudest voice in the room controlled the narrative. "Captain," Brad said, his voice booming with projected confidence. "Thank you for coming back. I know you have a schedule to keep, but safety has to come first." He gestured dramatically toward seat 1A, where Marcus sat quietly, his hands resting on his closed book. "This passenger," Brad continued, pointing a finger that trembled slightly with adrenaline, "has been belligerent since boarding. He refused crew instructions regarding the window shade, he has been aggressively staring at me, and he made threatening remarks about my business dealings. I don't feel comfortable flying over the Atlantic with him sitting next to me." Sarah, the flight attendant, stood by the bulkhead, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She looked at the captain, then at the floor. She wanted to speak, to say that Brad was the one shouting, but the fear of the complaint letter, the fear of the corporate algorithm that tracked customer satisfaction scores, choked the words in her throat. Captain Miller didn't look at Brad. He didn't acknowledge the finger-pointing or the expensive suit. His eyes were locked on seat 1A. The captain's face, usually a mask of professional detachment, went slack. His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of genuine shock passing through them before he regained his composure. He took a step forward, moving past Brad as if the vice president of sales was nothing more than a beverage cart blocking the aisle. Brad blinked. He stepped sideways to intercept the captain. "Captain," Brad said, his voice sharpening, "I am talking to you. I am a Diamond Medallion member. I am the one who filed the complaint." Captain Miller stopped. He turned his head slowly to look at Brad. The look wasn't one of deference. It was the look a parent gives a child who has just interrupted a serious conversation among adults. "One moment, sir," Captain Miller said. His voice was cold, professional, and final. Brad's mouth opened, then closed. He looked around the cabin, seeking allies. Mrs. Gable in 2A was watching with a small, tight smile. Elias in 2B was still holding his phone up, the red recording light blinking steadily. Captain Miller turned back to seat 1A. He removed his cap, holding it under his arm. He straightened his posture, not in a military brace, but in a gesture of profound respect. "Dr. Thorne," Captain Miller said. The silence in the cabin was absolute. The hum of the auxiliary power unit seemed to fade away. Marcus looked up. He adjusted his tortoiseshell glasses. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Captain Miller," Marcus said, his voice calm and even. "I believe we met at the shareholder gala in Chicago last year. You were receiving the safety award for 20 years of accident-free command." "Yes, sir," Miller said. "I didn't see your name on the VIP manifest this morning. The system. It sometimes masks the privacy-flagged accounts. I prefer it that way," Marcus said. "I like to fly without fanfare. It helps me see how the airline operates when people don't think they are being watched." Brad stood frozen in the aisle. The words were bouncing around his skull like marbles in a dryer. Shareholder gala. Privacy flagged. Fanfare. Brad let out a nervous, incredulous laugh. Wait, hold on," Brad stammered, stepping back into the conversation. He gestured at Marcus. "You know this guy? He said he was an engineer. He said he was a mechanic." "I am an engineer," Marcus corrected gently, looking at Brad. "And I have the utmost respect for mechanics. Without them, gravity wins." Captain Miller turned to Brad. His expression hardened. "Dr. Marcus Thorne is one of the most brilliant aeronautical engineers of his generation," the captain said. "He designed the high-bypass turbofan intake system on the engines that are currently hanging off the wings of this aircraft. He holds 40 patents that make modern aviation possible." Brad stared. He looked at the plain black polo shirt. He looked at the scuffed leather bag. "Okay, so he's a smart guy," Brad said, his voice rising, trying to regain the high ground. "That doesn't give him the right to be rude. He refused to close his shade. He made me feel threatened. I don't care if he invented the wing, if he is disrupting the flight, he needs to go." Captain Miller looked at Sarah. "Sarah?" the captain asked. Sarah looked up. She saw the panic in Brad's eyes. But she also saw the quiet strength in Marcus's posture. She remembered Marcus's words. "Dignity is not for sale." She took a deep breath. She thought about the voucher she had offered. She thought about how she had almost asked a legend to move to the back of the bus because a bully had a louder voice. Mr. Sterling has been shouting since he boarded, Sarah said, her voice shaking but gaining strength with every word. He shoved his bag onto Dr. Thorne's jacket. He insulted Dr. Thorne's appearance. He demanded I move Dr. Thorne. When Dr. Thorne refused to be bullied, Mr. Sterling accused him of being a security threat. Liar! Brad screamed. He spun toward her, his face turning a deep, dangerous violet. You are lying to cover your ass. I will have your job for this. I will sue this airline into the ground. Sir, step back, Captain Miller warned, his hand moving to the radio on his belt. Brad ignored him. He was cornered. His reality was fracturing. He turned back to Marcus. And you, Brad yelled, pointing a trembling finger. You set me up. You sat there quietly letting me think you were nobody. You played me. This is entrapment. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt. He stood up. He wasn't a tall man, but in that moment he seemed to fill the entire cabin. He didn't step toward Brad. He just stood his ground. I did not play you, Mr. Sterling, Marcus said. I simply let you be yourself. You filled in the blanks with your own prejudices. You saw a black man in a polo shirt and you decided I was a servant. You saw a quiet man and decided I was weak. You saw a patient man and decided I was submissive. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. You asked me earlier what business brought me to Zurich, Marcus said. Brad was breathing hard, his chest heaving. So what? I told you I was conducting a risk assessment for an acquisition, Marcus said. Yeah, liability, Brad spat. Boring insurance stuff. Marcus tapped his screen. He held the phone up. Thorne Capital is a private equity firm, Mr. Sterling. We specialize in distressed assets. We look for companies with good technology but bad leadership. Companies that are rotting from the head down. Brad's eyes widened. He recognized the name now. Thorne Capital. The mysterious firm that had made the tender offer for Omnicorp. The white knight that was supposed to save his stock options. No, Brad whispered. No way. We have been looking at Omnicorp for 6 months, Marcus said. The software is solid. The code is clean. But the culture? We had concerns. We heard rumors of toxicity in the sales division. We heard about inflated numbers and aggressive tactics. Marcus took a step forward. So, I decided to fly commercial to the signing meeting. I wanted to review the final due diligence reports. And as fate would have it, I ended up sitting next to the vice president of sales. Brad felt the blood drain from his legs. He gripped the headrest of seat 1B to keep from falling. Dr. Thorne, Brad stammered, his voice dropping to a whisper. Sir. Look. It's been a long day. The stress. The storm. I didn't know. If I had known who you were. That, Marcus said, cutting him off, is exactly the problem. Marcus's voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of the galley. If you had known I was the chairman, you would have offered me a drink. You would have asked about my comfort. You would have been charming. You treat people with respect only when you think they have power over you. That is not leadership, Mr. Sterling. That is cowardice. Brad looked around the cabin. He looked at the captain, who was staring at him with stone-cold judgment. He looked at Elias, who was filming. He looked at Mrs. Gable, who was nodding slowly. I can fix this, Brad said, desperation clawing at his throat. We can talk about this. The deal. The merger. It's good for everyone. I can explain. My numbers are solid. Your numbers are fictional, Marcus said. I was reading your Q3 report when you boarded. You booked the Project Horizon revenue before the contract was signed. That is fraud, Brad. Brad flinched as if he had been slapped. And regarding the merger, Marcus continued. I just sent an email to your board of directors. I withdrew the offer. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of a career ending. It was the sound of a mortgage defaulting, of a reputation incinerating, of a future evaporating. You can't do that, Brad whispered. That deal. It's everything. The company will go under. Then it goes under, Marcus said. I will not invest $400 million in a company where the leadership thinks dignity is a luxury reserved for the elite. I look for liabilities, Brad. And I found the biggest one sitting in seat 1B. Brad stood there, shaking. He looked at his phone. It was buzzing. A call from Gary CEO. Then a text. Then another call. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Captain Miller stepped forward. "Mr. Sterling," the captain said. "I need your boarding pass." Brad looked at him dazed. "What?" "You are being removed from this flight," Miller said. "Under federal regulations, you have interfered with the flight crew, created a hostile environment, and disrupted the safety of this aircraft. And personally, I don't want you on my plane. But how will I get to Zurich?" Brad asked, his voice sounding like a child's. "You won't," Miller said. "Not on this airline. You are being placed on our internal no-fly list effective immediately. You can collect your bags at the gate." Miller nodded to the door. 2 large Port Authority officers stepped onto the plane. They were soaked from the rain, and they didn't look happy about the delay. "Sir," the first officer said, grabbing Brad's elbow. "Let's go." Brad tried to pull his arm away. "Don't touch me. Do you know who I am?" The officer didn't blink. "Yeah. You're the guy holding up the flight. Move." Brad grabbed his Toomey bag from the overhead bin. He fumbled with it, almost dropping it on Marcus's head again. Marcus didn't flinch. He just watched. Brad dragged the bag down the aisle. He walked past the curious eyes of the economy comfort passengers who had been watching through the curtain gap. He walked past the flight attendants he had ignored. He walked past the life he used to think he owned. At the door he stopped. He turned back one last time to look at Marcus. "You ruined my life," Brad hissed. Over a window shade. Marcus picked up his book. He opened it to the page marked by the silk ribbon. "No," Marcus said, not looking up. "You ruined it yourself. I just turned on the light so you could see the wreckage." The police officer gave Brad a shove. "Keep moving." Brad disappeared into the jet bridge. The heavy door swung shut with a definitive thud. The cabin exhaled. It was a collective release of breath, the tension snapping like a rubber band. Sarah leaned against the bulkhead, her knees weak. She looked at Marcus. Tears were welling in her eyes. "Dr. Thorne," she whispered. "I am so sorry. I should have stood up to him sooner. I was just..." Marcus looked at her. His expression was kind. "You were following the algorithm, Sarah," he said. "The system is designed to prioritize the wallet over the human. Puts you in an impossible position." He tapped his phone again. "I sent a note to the CEO of this airline as well. We are old friends. I told him that his platinum status program is creating monsters. And I told him that his lead flight attendant on Flight 902 handled a security crisis with grace under pressure. You won't be getting a complaint in your file, Sarah. You will be getting a commendation." Sarah covered her mouth with her hand, a sob escaping. "Thank you." Mrs. Gable leaned across the aisle. "Bravo," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Just bravo. My husband built this airline on service, not servitude. He would have liked you, young man." Marcus smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed his face. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. From across the aisle, Elias lowered his phone. He stopped recording. He looked at Marcus with a mixture of awe and intimidation. "That was..." Elias started, then paused, searching for the right word. "That was absolute gangsta." Marcus chuckled. It was a dry, rusty sound. "It was just business, son," Marcus said. Captain Miller came back on the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the disturbance. The passenger has been removed, and we have been cleared for immediate pushback. We will try to make up some time in the air. Flight attendants, prepare for departure." The engines whined to life, a deep, powerful thrum that vibrated through the floorboards. The lights flickered and then steadied. Marcus put his phone away. He didn't check the stock market. He didn't check the news. He knew the fallout from his email to Omnicorp's board would be swift and brutal. By the time he landed in Zurich, Brad Sterling would likely be scrubbing his LinkedIn profile. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Right now, Marcus adjusted his glasses. He looked out the window as the plane began to move. The rain was still falling, streaking the glass, but in the distance, through the gray clouds, he could see a faint line of gold. The sun was setting. He opened his book on Stoic philosophy. He read the line he had been looking at before the interruption. "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." Marcus took a sip of his sparkling water. No ice. It was going to be a good flight. The plane taxied toward the runway, leaving the drama and the noise of the terminal behind. Inside the cabin, a new atmosphere settled. It wasn't just quiet, it was respectful. The passengers looked at one another with a shared understanding. They had witnessed something rare. They had seen the veneer of entitlement stripped away to reveal the rot underneath, and they had seen dignity stand its ground without raising a fist. As the plane accelerated, pressing Marcus back into his seat, he closed his eyes. He thought about his father, the professor who had bought the Patek Philippe watch with his first paycheck, a man who had taught Marcus that true power wasn't about being the loudest in the room, but about being the most prepared. The wheels lifted off the tarmac. The plane banked sharply, punching through the storm clouds, rising higher and higher until the gray gave way to a blinding brilliant blue. Below them, somewhere in the terminal, a man in a navy suit was shouting at a ticket agent, trying to find a way home. But up here above the clouds the air was clear. Marcus turned the page. 6 hours later, halfway over the Atlantic, the cabin was dark. Most passengers were asleep. Marcus was awake, working on his laptop now. He wasn't working on the acquisition. That deal was dead. He was drafting a memo to his own executive team at Thorn Capital. Subject: cultural due diligence. Effective immediately. We are implementing a new protocol for all potential acquisitions. We will no longer rely solely on financial audits. We will be deploying blind evaluators to interact with the leadership teams of target companies in service settings, restaurants, airports, hotels. How a leader treats a server is a more accurate predictor of long-term fiscal stability than their Q3 projection. If they fail the humanity test, they fail the investment. Sign, M. Thorn. He hit send. Sarah walked by with a bottle of water. She saw him awake. Can I get you anything else, Dr. Thorn? She whispered. Marcus smiled. No, Sarah. I have everything I need. He looked at the empty seat next to him. Seat 1B. It was just a leather chair. It held no power, conferred no status. It was just a seat. And for the rest of the flight, it remained beautifully, peacefully empty. The heavy click of the aircraft door sealing shut echoed through the first-class cabin like a gavel striking a sounding block. For a moment no one moved. The vacuum of silence that Brad Sterling left behind was heavier than his presence had been. It was the silence of a battlefield after the artillery stops. A mix of relief, shock, and the lingering ringing in the ears. Marcus Thorn did not celebrate. He did not high-five the other passengers or order a round of drinks. He simply adjusted the cuff of his shirt, picked up his book and placed it on his lap. But he didn't open it. He was looking at his hands, steady and calm, analyzing the tremors of adrenaline that he refused to let show on his face. He was an engineer, and he knew that even the most robust structures vibrated under stress. From across the aisle, the young man Elias was staring at him. Elias's phone was face down on the tray table now, the red recording light finally extinguished. He looked like he had just watched a ghost walk through a wall. Mrs. Gable in seat 2A was the first to break the stillness. She reached into her handbag, pulled out a linen handkerchief, and dabbed the corner of her mouth. I haven't seen a dressing down like that since my father fired his estate manager in 1982 for skimming from the hedge fund, she said, her voice trembling slightly but regaining its aristocratic lilt. You have a terrible poker face, Dr. Thorn, but a magnificent right hook. Metaphorically speaking, of course. Marcus turned to her, his expression softening into a tired smile. I don't gamble, Mrs. Gable, Marcus said quietly. I calculate odds. There is a difference. Sarah, the lead flight attendant, was standing in the galley kitchen, her back pressed against the metal cabinets. She was shaking. The adrenaline dump was hitting her hard. She had broken protocol. She had sided against a Diamond member. In the rigid hierarchy of airline service, she had committed heresy. She hugged herself, trying to stop her hands from trembling. Captain Miller's voice crackled over the intercom, authoritative and calm. The voice of God from the cockpit. Flight attendants, prepare for crosscheck and departure. We have been cleared for an expedited taxi. Let's get this bird in the air. As the engines began to spool up, the whine rising to a roar, the reality of the last 30 minutes began to settle into the leather seats. But while the cabin prepared for flight, the war was far from over. It had just moved to a different front. Inside the terminal, the atmosphere was sterile and cold, a sharp contrast to the heated cabin. Brad Sterling was not going quietly. He was walking fast, flanked by the two Port Authority officers, his Toomey bag rolling loudly on the terrazzo floor. He wasn't in handcuffs, not yet, but the way the officers positioned themselves, one slightly ahead and one behind, made it clear he was in custody. Brad was in full damage control mode. His brain, flooded with cortisol, was cycling through strategies: deny, attack, bribe, threaten. It was the corporate playbook that had gotten him to the VP level, and he saw no reason to abandon it now. Officers, look. This is a massive misunderstanding, Brad said, his voice pitching high, echoing off the glass walls of the empty jet bridge corridor. That man on the plane, he's unstable. He baited me. I'm a victim of entrapment. I want to file a counter-report immediately. The officer walking behind him, a man named Rodriguez who had spent 20 years patrolling JFK and had seen every variation of human entitlement, didn't even look up. You can file whatever you want when we get to the precinct, Mr. Sterling. Right now, you're being processed for a federal disturbance. Precinct? Brad stopped dead. The Toomey bag skidded. I'm not going to a precinct. I have a connecting flight. I have meetings. You can't arrest me for an argument. Officer Rodriguez stopped. He turned to face Brad. He stepped into Brad's personal space, looming just enough to remind Brad that the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. You delayed a transatlantic flight, Rodriguez said, his voice flat. You interfered with the flight crew. You disobeyed a direct order from the pilot in command. In the eyes of the FAA, that's not an argument, sir. That's a felony. Keep moving. Brad's stomach dropped. Felony. The word tasted like ash. He started walking again, his legs feeling numb. He pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely unlock it. He needed to get ahead of the narrative. He needed to spin this before the plane landed. He opened Twitter X. He started typing furiously. Unbelievable service on at Omni Air today. Assaulted by a passenger and then kicked off for complaining. Woke ideology run amok. Safety is dead. Hashtag boycott Omni Air. Hashtag justice for Brad. He hit send. He felt a fleeting moment of power. He had a following. He had a LinkedIn network. He would crush them in the court of public opinion. Then his phone buzzed. It wasn't a like or a retweet. It was a text from Gary, his CEO. Call me. Now. Brad swallowed hard. He dialed.
Understand is
30,000 feet above the Atlantic, the seatbelt sign chimed off. The cabin service began, the clinking of china and crystal providing a comforting, civilized soundtrack to the darkness outside. Marcus had declined the meal. He had his laptop open, but he wasn't working. He was staring at the blank screen, processing. There was a movement across the aisle. Elias unbuckled his seatbelt and moved to the empty seat, seat 1B. He hesitated, hovering over the leather that still bore the indentation of Brad's arrogance. Do you mind? Elias asked, gesturing to the seat. Marcus looked at the empty seat, then at Elias. The seat is just a seat, son. It doesn't carry the ghost. Sit. Elias sat down. He was young, brilliant, and visibly shaken. He wore a hoodie that probably cost more than Marcus's first car. But his eyes were wide with a mix of reverence and confusion. I have to ask you something, Elias said, leaning in, keeping his voice low. Marcus turned slightly. Asked. Why didn't you yell? Elias asked. I was recording. I was ready to jump in. But you just let him dig his own grave. If someone spoke to me like that, disrespecting my hustle, disrespecting my space, I would have lost it. How did you stay so calm? Marcus took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked tired. The stoicism was a shield, but the shield was heavy. Elias, Marcus said softly. Do you know how an airplane wing works? Elias blinked. Lift? Bernoulli's principle? Resistance, Marcus corrected. A wing works because it uses the resistance of the air to create lift. If the air didn't push back, the plane wouldn't fly. But the wing doesn't fight the air. It doesn't scream at the wind. It shapes it. It uses the energy directed against it to rise. Marcus looked at the young man. That man, Mr. Sterling. He wanted a fight. He wanted me to be the angry black man. He wanted me to be the thug. If I had yelled, if I had stood up and puffed my chest, I would have fulfilled his narrative. I would have given him exactly what he needed to justify his fear. I would have become the caricature. Marcus pointed at Elias's phone. You recorded it. You saw what happened. If I had screamed, the video would show two men arguing. It would be a debate. Both sides. But because I sat still. Because I let him scream at a wall. The video shows a man fighting himself. It shows the truth. Elias nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. But didn't it hurt? Elias asked. To let him say those things. To let him treat you like nothing? Marcus looked out the dark window. He saw his reflection in the glass, gray hair, tired eyes, a man who had fought 1,000 battles just to sit in seat 1A. It always hurts, Elias. Dignity isn't anesthesia. It doesn't numb the pain. It just gives you the strength to not let the pain define you. I didn't stay quiet because I was weak. I stayed quiet because I knew who held the keys. Marcus tapped the laptop screen. And I knew that real power isn't about making noise. It's about consequences. Elias looked down at his phone. He opened his gallery. The video was there. 3 minutes and 40 seconds of Brad Sterling self-destructing. I haven't posted it yet, Elias said. I was going to put it on TikTok. It would go viral in an hour. Marcus looked at the phone. That is your choice, Marcus said. But ask yourself. Is the goal justice or is the goal content? Elias paused. He looked at the thumbnail of the video. Brad's red, sweaty face, his finger pointing. Justice, Elias whispered. Then wait, Marcus said. Let the system work first. If the system fails, then you release the tape. That is your leverage. Don't spend it all at once. Back in the terminal, Brad Sterling was sitting on a plastic bench in a holding room, his phone pressed to his ear. The conversation with Gary was not going well. Gary, please, you have to listen to me, Brad pleaded, his voice cracking. It was a setup. The guy. He's Marcus Thorne. He baited me. He was sitting there looking like nothing. How was I supposed to know? On the other end of the line, Gary's voice was ice cold. Gary was a CEO who survived by cutting off necrotic limbs before the infection spread. How were you supposed to know? Gary repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. You are the VP of sales, Brad. Your job is to know people. Your job is to read the room. You just insulted the man who holds the mortgage on our entire company. It's personal. Brad argued, desperation rising. It's a personal dispute. He can't tank the deal because of a seat dispute. That's illegal. That's fiduciary malpractice. Brad stopped. Gary cut him off. He didn't tank the deal because you were rude. He forwarded me your Q3 projections. The silence in the holding room was absolute. The fluorescent lights hummed like buzzing flies. He sent me a breakdown, Brad. He noticed the revenue recognition from the Project Horizon account. He noticed that you booked the revenue before the contract was signed. Brad felt the blood leave his head. That was a projection. A placeholder. Everyone does it. It's fraud, Brad, Gary said. And Marcus Thorne just CC'd the SEC on his email to the board. Brad dropped the phone. It clattered onto the linoleum floor. The screen cracked. He stared at the spiderweb fracture on the glass. It was over. Not just the job, the career, the bonus, the house in the Hamptons, the identity. The door to the holding room opened. Officer Rodriguez stepped in holding a clipboard. Mr. Sterling, Rodriguez said. We've finished the paperwork. You're being charged with interference with the flight crew and disorderly conduct. You'll be released on your own recognizance, but you have a court date in Queens next month. Brad didn't look up. He was staring at his hands. The gold Rolex suddenly felt very heavy, like a shackle. Can I go to the lounge? Brad whispered. I need a drink. Rodriguez laughed. It was a harsh, dry bark. The lounge? Pal, you're in the secured area. We're escorting you to curbside. Your ticket has been voided. You're not flying anywhere today. Brad stood up. His legs felt like jelly. He picked up his Toomey bag. It felt lighter now, empty of purpose. He walked out of the room, flanked by the officers walking past the Hudson newsstand, past the duty-free shops, past the world he used to belong to. As he walked through the automatic doors into the humid New York night, standing on the curb amidst the exhaust fumes of taxis and buses, his phone buzzed again. He picked it up. A notification from LinkedIn. Gary has viewed your profile. Then another notification. Your access to Omnicorp Salesforce has been revoked. Brad sat down on the curb, his expensive suit dragging in the gutter water. He put his head in his hands. He was finally truly on the ground level. High above, the flight was nearing the coast of Ireland. The cabin was dim, illuminated only by the soft glow of reading lights. Sarah walked down the aisle. She held a fresh bottle of water. She stopped at seat 1A. Dr. Thorne? She whispered. Marcus was awake. He closed his laptop. Yes, Sarah? She hesitated. She looked around to make sure the galley was empty. I wanted to ask you. She started, her voice trembling slightly. You sent that email to the CEO. About me. I did, Marcus said. Are you sure? Are you sure it won't backfire? Sarah asked. The policy is strict. We are supposed to de-escalate. We are supposed to accommodate Diamond members at all costs. Technically, I failed. I let the argument escalate. Marcus turned his chair fully toward her. Sarah, listen to me. He waited until she met his eyes. Rules are maps. They tell you where the safe roads are. But maps don't show you the storms. When you are in a storm, you don't look at the map. You look at your compass. Your compass is your integrity. He took the water bottle from her. I told the CEO that the policy is broken, not the employee. I told him that if he wants to keep his company, he needs to empower his staff to define customer service as respect, not servitude. Marcus smiled. And I own 7% of the airline stock, Sarah. He will listen. Sarah let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for 5 years. Tears pricked her eyes again, but they weren't tears of fear this time. They were tears of validation. Thank you, she whispered. Go rest, Sarah, Marcus said. We have a landing to make. The descent into Zurich was smooth, the Swiss Alps rising like jagged teeth through the morning mist. As the wheels touched down, a gentle, barely there kiss of rubber on tarmac, Marcus felt the familiar sense of completion. The plane taxied to the gate. The chime sounded. Seatbelts clicked open. But something was different this time. Usually there was a mad rush. People stood up before the light went off, grabbing bags, shoving for position, desperate to be 1 minute closer to the exit. Today nobody moved. They waited. Marcus unbuckled his belt. He stood up. He pulled his leather bag from under the seat. He put on his charcoal blazer, the one Brad had crushed. He smoothed the lapel. It bounced back, just as he had said it would. He stepped into the aisle. Only then did the other passengers stand. It wasn't a coordinated salute. It wasn't a scene from a movie where everyone claps. It was subtler than that. It was a deferral. They were waiting for him to go first. Mrs. Gable nodded to him as he passed. Elias gave him a fist bump, quick and respectful. Marcus walked to the front of the plane. Captain Miller was standing by the cockpit door, shaking hands. Dr. Thorne, Miller said, offering a firm grip. It was an honor. The honor was mine, Captain, Marcus said. Smooth landing. I received a message from HQ via ACARS, Miller said quietly. The CEO wants to meet you for dinner in Zurich tonight. He says he has some ideas about revising the Diamond training module. Marcus smiled. Tell him I'm available. But tell him I'm picking the restaurant. And the staff there are treated very well. Marcus walked up the jet bridge. The air in Zurich was crisp and clean, smelling of pine and efficiency. He turned on his phone. The first email was from his legal team. Omnicorp deal terminated. SEC investigation initiated against Brad Sterling for revenue fraud. The second email was from Elias. It was a link to a private video file, password protected. The subject line read, Insurance. Keeping it safe. Marcus didn't click it. He didn't need to watch it again. He walked through customs, his passport stamped by a stern Swiss officer who didn't smile. Marcus didn't mind. He didn't need the officer to smile. He just needed him to do his job. He walked out into the arrivals hall. His driver was waiting, holding a simple sign Thorn. As Marcus walked toward the car, he passed a trash can. He saw a man in a suit, another executive perhaps, yelling at a driver about being 2 minutes late. The man was red-faced, pointing, demanding. Marcus stopped. He watched for a second. In the past, he might have looked away. He might have just kept walking, saving his energy for his own battles. But today he felt different. He felt the weight of the system that he had helped build, and the responsibility to maintain it. He walked over to the man. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice deep and resonant, cutting through the man's tirade. The man turned, startled. "What?" "The driver is doing his best," Marcus said calmly. "And your shouting is delaying your own departure." The man looked at Marcus. He looked at the calm eyes, the expensive watch, the posture of absolute certainty. The man faltered. The rage deflated, punctured by the sheer presence of dignity. "Sorry," the man muttered, stepping back. "Just stress. It is only stress if you let it break you," Marcus said. He turned and walked away, his leather bag swinging by his side. He got into his car. The door closed, shutting out the noise of the airport. "Where to, Dr. Thorne?" the driver asked. "The office," Marcus said. "I have some policies to rewrite." He opened his book again. He found his place. The plane ride was over, but the work, the real work of building a world where Seat 1A wasn't a throne, but just a seat, was only just beginning. Marcus looked out the window at the rising sun reflecting off the Alps. He took a deep breath. It was a good day to be an engineer. He had a lot of fixing to do.